Okay, well, let me welcome people. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to YPOers and friends around the world. I'm Dick Simon. I'm chair of the YPO Psychedelic Medicine for Mental Health Group, and I spent all of my time helping do whatever I can to advance this work, both because of the incredible evidence and data, and we'll be talking about some of that today, for its efficacy, addressing otherwise really treatment-resistant or otherwise untreatable mental health issues. And in a personal level, having learned in our own family how difficult and intractable these conditions can be. Currently, I'm also a co-founder and CEO of Sensorium Therapeutics, a drug discovery company focused on translating insights from nature into transformational therapeutics for those suffering from mental illness and other CNS conditions. I'm very grateful for the involvement of many YPOers in what we're doing at Sensorium. So this call will be a 60-minute call with question and answer session following Amy and my conversation. If you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A feature on your Zoom screen, and we'll get to them during the Q&A session. Please note that this call is being recorded, and the recording link will be sent to all people who have registered. There's a good reason for signing up for future programs, even if the live timing doesn't actually work for you. So we're incredibly privileged to be joined today by Amy Emerson. Amy is the CEO of MAPS Public Benefit Corporation and a fellow YPOer. She's been in the pharmaceutical industry for more than 25 years in various leadership positions. And her career grew out of her love of science, nature, problem solving, and growing up in Alaska. She began as a researcher and went into the vaccine industry. Most of her career was spent in clinical development, and she was introduced to MAPS first 19 years ago when they were beginning the approval process in the first study with a very, very lean team. She believed in their mission to bring psychedelics in to help treat mental health conditions, and they needed a lot of help to get this first study going. So Amy spent nights and weekends helping. Then in 2009, she decided to dedicate all of her time to MAPS in order to build on the then promising results and to add additional resources. She became leader of the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation when it was founded in late 2014 and has taken it through all the FDA trials with some very exciting phase 3 results she'll be talking about. So it's an honor to have Amy as a friend and to witness the incredible work being done at MAPS. So let's dive in. Amy and I will speak for about 40 minutes before turning it over to Q&A again. Again, if you have any questions, please submit them via the Q&A feature on the Zoom screen. So Amy, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Dick. We've had some great conversations over the years. We've known each other, so I'm excited to do this for everybody else today.
Great, great. Well, let's start off. Can you give a little bit of context? What is psychedelic-assisted therapy for those who are not familiar with it?
Yeah, so a psychedelic-assisted therapy is really a medication-assisted psychotherapy, and the medication is acting as a catalyst for the psychotherapy and for helping to process traumatic memories. So that's just it in a very simple form. It's very different than a daily dose medication to help somebody process traumatic memories, where most of the time what we have available now is more about symptom management. So this is quite a different way of approaching treating somebody's trauma. It's a 3-dose model. So and let's actually pause for a moment and talk about what is a psychedelic. So a psychedelic just means mind manifesting, right? A lot of people think of a psychedelic as a hallucinogen like psilocybin or LSD. And that they are a psychedelic, but they are a traditional hallucinogen. And there's other things that are considered to be psychedelic, cannabis and MDMA. So MDMA is not traditionally considered a hallucinogen, but it is a psychedelic. It is mind manifesting. And it really helps people in multiple ways when combined with therapy. It helps in a way that it's working on this kind of HPA axis area, and it's helping with the way it works in the brain. and it's helping people to open up to talk about their trauma. And it's done in 3 doses, which is quite different than, you know, what we think about treatments, right? So it's a 3-dose model of a drug-assisted therapy, and they're done about 1 month apart. So other psychedelic therapies might look a little bit different than that. They might have a different time frame. They might have a different number of dosing, but that's what ours looks like when we use MDMA-assisted therapy.
Great. And can you just let people who aren't familiar know what MDMA is?
Yes. Well, MDMA, a lot of people may have heard of it as it's a Schedule 1. It was used prior to being scheduled in 1985 in therapy. It then moved from being used just in therapy to being used recreationally. And so you may be familiar with hearing it called ecstasy or Molly. But that is not what we're working with. It's quite different to be working with a GMP manufactured scheduled substance where you know exactly what it is and exactly how it's made. So yeah, do you have more questions about that, or is that?
No, just wanted to make sure that people, you know,
Yeah, exactly.
So can you, we'll get a,
just making sure you weren't asking me to tell you like the specific chemical formulation, because I'm not the one that can rattle that off, but other people on my team would have probably rattled that off for you immediately.
we'll leave it at MDMA.
Okay.
We'll leave it at MDMA. Great. Can you give people a sense as to the mission and activities of the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation and how that relates to MAPS that people may have heard of in other contexts? Rick Doblin has been a speaker on these webinars earlier.
Yeah. So maybe it would help if I said a little bit about what is a public benefit corporation, because maybe a lot of people aren't familiar with what that is. Yeah. So we're a Delaware incorporated public benefit corporation, which is we're for profit. PBCs are, but they also are driven by more than just profit. They are driven by specific values that they hold in balance with that. So the main 2 differences between a PBC and a traditional for-profit, one is the PBC adopts a public benefit special purpose at their incorporation. And the intention of that is that special purpose creates positive effects for stakeholders that are not shareholders with financial interest. So it's taking into account that there's more stakeholders. And when you make decisions at a PBC, the directors are required to balance the pursuit of that stated public benefit purpose with the interests of your shareholders and your stakeholders and profit, right? So it's a much more balanced decision-making that's driven by this special purpose. So that's just at a high level what a PBC is. And I'm starting to see more medical companies be PBCs or move from traditional for-profit to a PBC. So it's really interesting. It makes a lot of sense when you think about pharmaceutical companies being a PBC, because we have an incredible number of stakeholders in our patient population that we should be considering when we make decisions. So we were incorporated at the end of 2014. We had been just a research group within the nonprofit of MAPS. That's the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. It's a mouthful. And that is Rick Doblin is the founder of that. I met Rick, as you said, about 20 years ago, worked with him to build up a research team there. But at the end of 2014, after we had accomplished some of our early phase 2 studies and had some good results and knew that we were going to want to move into a phase 3 program and really take this through an approval process, we created MAPS PBC. And we're dedicated to improving mental health. We have a mission to lead research development and integration of psychedelic medicines, therapies into the healthcare system. And we want to do this with prioritizing that purpose over profit. We want to hold that in balance. And so our structure allows us to focus on that, to do both of those things in a balanced way. Let's see, what else would I want to say about that? But maybe some of the things that we will do as a PBC, like some of the ways that we live up to those values and to that mission would be things like having a really robust patient assistance program, becoming profitable. We do need to have a revenue because we also want to continue to develop new treatment options that would come out to patients, so that we feel like that's important, especially in underserved areas. And we want to do this in a really equitable way for people. So there's also, those are the kind of the things that we're reaching for as we bring this through the medical system. There's another interesting part to it, which is transparency. And we really take this seriously. So we share a lot more of the information on our research and how we approach it and how we talk to the FDA on our website than most any other pharma would do. Not all PBCs have to do that. That is just one of the values that we have, is to help other people in this field to we're setting a lot of precedent because we're going first, right? And so we want to share that information and help others along the way to bring psychedelic assisted therapies into the medical system. But we're also required as a PBC to report on our progress at least every other year. So this is transparency is built into the PBC system, and that you need to measure what you say you're going to do and report on it. I think we probably go a little above and beyond that.
You definitely do. You definitely, just all part of your amazing ethos. Why is moving from structure to the actual therapeutic that you're working on, why is MAPS focused on MDMA versus other psychedelics that all show promise as effective therapeutic agents?
Yeah, so, we really felt, when Rick first started MAPS, there was a desire to work in mental health. There's a huge need, and that need has just been growing. And then within mental health, there was a huge unmet need in PTSD. And so there's like 12 million people just in the US that are suffering from PTSD. And he knew from prior to MDMA being scheduled, it was used in combination with therapy, and especially in couples therapy. But what those therapists noticed as they were using it, what it was really good for processing trauma. So there was a lot of evidence. Most pharma companies don't get to start with like that kind of evidence already. And there's already a lot of publications on this prior to us starting. So it kind of felt like just like the perfect way to start, like a huge unmet need and something that there was already evidence and an understanding of how to use it in a productive way to help a population. There's also, the population of people that have PTSD. It's a lot of times people just think of vets, right? But it's way more than that. The people, vets make up probably only 6% of the PTSD population. And it is a group that we work with, but it's actually highly women and highly, people of color, and, 2 times more likely to get PTSD if you're a woman or a person of color. So though we think about vets, PTSD comes from all kinds of things. It comes from all kinds of experiencing of violence or sexual trauma, witnessing death, or having, feeling like your life is threatened. So it was a really big and very sympathetic group of people that have PTSD. So this is why we took MDMA, we had that evidence, and we had a group of people that really needed treatment. There hasn't been any innovative treatments for PTSD in 2 decades, right? Everything is about symptom management when you have PTSD.
So 2 questions. One, can you repeat that amazing statistic that you cited about veterans as a percent of that population? And then talk a little bit about what else is done today for PTSD.
Yeah, so I think it's about 6% of the PTSD population is vets. Yeah.
So 94%. I mean,
yeah. And in our studies, we see that even, in our studies, more than half of the people demographically are women in the study. And there's only a small percent that are vets and with military related trauma. So we have done a whole study just with vets. Like, one of the important things early on for us was to show that it didn't matter what the trauma was, and it didn't matter what your gender was to be treated. Because in the past, the studies of Zoloft and Paxil, they saw differences in the way women and men responded to the treatment. And that is what's the only available treatment still, is an antidepressant. That's the only thing approved. Now there's things that are off-label used for PTSD, but really it's symptom management. So it's it's using Zoloft or Paxil in combination with therapy a lot of the time, and sometimes on its own. And sometimes people find the medications don't help, and they just make them feel numb, and so they do therapy alone. So that's kind of what makes up the what's available for people right now. And we see that a large number of people remain symptomatic, highly symptomatic with whatever treatment they try. And the people that were coming into our study, let's see, in the phase 2, I think that on average, the people that we treated in our phase 2, so a phase 2 is the earlier stage, smaller clinical trials that you do, they'd had PTSD on average 19 years. Now we've done 2 phase 3 studies, which we're really proud of. The first phase 3, it was on average people had PTSD 14 years, and on the second one, 16 years. So these people had been suffering for a really long time before they entered our study and had tried all kinds of treatments, whether they were approved for PTSD or not.
Where are you? I mean, you mentioned phase 2. Can you share with everyone where you are now in the FDA process?
Yeah, so in order to get a drug approved by the FDA, you have to go through phases of clinical research. And the typical ones are like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1s are safety. We didn't really have to do many phase 1s. There was a couple that we had to do, but because, as I mentioned, MDMA had already been used in therapy and then also studied by NIDA to show its risks, there was a ton that was already published on safety. So we were able to use that and really start right into the phase 2 program. We did a number of phase 2 studies in different populations, different dosing, to really understand what was going to work best for people. And then we started our phase 3 program. You have to have 2 positive phase 3 studies this is typical, right? 2 phase 2, phase 3 positive studies to get approval by the FDA. So some companies do a lot more, like some companies do up to 5 studies to get 2 positive ones. And there are rare occasions where there's a high unmet need, like threatening, that people will go and get approval based on 1 phase 3 study, but that's unusual. So we have the typical program, 2 phase 3 studies looking at safety and efficacy, and we've completed both of those now. So that's really that final step. We have all of the data now in our phase 3 program, and we're submitting that to the FDA in the second half of this year in something called an NDA. That's your new drug application. And then FDA takes a look at all of that data. They ask you a lot of questions, and you go through a whole review. And probably, somewhere 10 to 12 months later, they let you know if your therapy has been approved or not.
What can you share, in this public context, as to your top line results that you've shared?
Yeah.
Your phase 3, the first portion of phase 1, and then what you can share about the confirmatory trial.
Yeah. So the first phase 3, we call it MAP 1, and the second phase 3 was called MAP 2. So the MAP 1 data has been published in Nature Medicine. Really proud of that. So again, if you'll remember, I said the people in that study entering at baseline had PTSD on average for 14 years, and their PTSD symptoms were considered to be severe. And we saw after just 3 treatments that 88% of the people in the MDMA group, so this was, I should just pause for a minute and say, everybody got therapy. So it wasn't a true placebo study. So one group got MDMA assisted therapy, and the other group got a placebo with the identical therapy. So there was still an intervention in the control group. All right, so people in the MDMA plus therapy group had 88% of them had clinically significant improvements in their PTSD symptoms. And that means they had a drop in the measure that we were using, a significant drop in the measure of how their symptoms are looked at. So they went from, severe to mild. So 88% of the people had that response. And then 67% of the people in the MDMA plus therapy group no longer met the criteria for the PTSD diagnosis. And that's just astounding when you consider that this is usually thought of as a a chronic
Yep.
disease that people are going to be treated for the rest of their life once it goes beyond, say, the first 6 months or so of having PTSD. There's a not natural resolution for a lot of people within the first 6 months, but then once it goes beyond that, it becomes really intractable.
Wow. When, I mean, those results, can you help people who aren't used to seeing clinical data get a sense as to how incredible those results are?
Well, if you think about that, you've been in therapy or on an SSRI for 14 years and your symptoms have still remained the same, and then you go through a 3-dose treatment and all of a sudden your symptoms are decreased or you no longer have PTSD, the things that you're experiencing are sleeping better, not having nightmares, feeling safe. So all of these things are really common for someone with PTSD. They have terrible sleep, they have nightmares. It's like their brain doesn't realize they're in a safe situation. They're constantly in the moment of trauma and they're reacting from that way. So a lot of people are hypervigilant, they're angry, they have trouble controlling their emotions. So that leads to not having very good relationships for work and for family. And socially, right? And so this has a huge burden on more than just the person with PTSD. So imagine you've had this for 14 years and all of a sudden your emotions feel more regulated, you feel safe, you're able to go through a day without, re-experiencing your trauma. So you're starting to mend relationships with your family and your social group. And in fact, we measured that. So the secondary measure in our study was a functional measure of impairment, looking at social and family and work impairment. Yeah. And we had statistically significant results on all of those domains of people functionally improving, as well as having their symptoms improve. And then we did a second phase 3 study. So I should just say, for people who do like numbers, the p-value on that first study was 0.0001, which is highly, highly statistically significant.
Can you translate p-value to those who are not familiar with it?
It's a way of measuring, like, could this have happened just by chance?
Right.
Just by the random chance that you put the right things together, and if you repeated it a second time, you wouldn't get the same results. So the smaller that number, the less chance that this was just by chance. So that is a very tiny number, meaning it's highly statistically significant. So we did a second phase 3 study, and we had we haven't published that yet, so I can't share the p-value or the exact, top line data, except to say it confirmed the data of the first phase 3 study. And so we'll be publishing that. It should come out, towards the middle of this year. But again, also in that group, seeing that the functional impairment is also improved. So it means people's lives are changed, right? And we hear that a lot from people, that what we're doing is getting to the root of the trauma, which is the traumatic event, and reprocessing the memories. And when people are able to do that, when they're able to go into a safe place with therapists that understand how to work with them, reprocess those memories, it changes not only the way they're experiencing their life, but it's also changing what's happening in their brain and in their body. Their HPA axis is getting reset. There's a change in how the amygdala is activated. This is your fear center, your fight or flight center. All of these things are changing. So not just the way that they experience symptoms, but there's actual physical changes. And it's really like the 3-dose model that we use really helps to make these things stick, right? It makes an actual change, and then it happens. People get to talk about it after the therapy session. They get to make meaning out of it. It starts to integrate. They do it again, same thing, and they do it a third time. And when we measure these results, we're measuring 2 months out from their last session. So if people are curious, like, oh, is this some afterglow? You're measuring right after somebody's had MDMA and they just had a really good experience. We're not. They're going back into their normal life for 2 months almost after their last session, and then we're measuring. And then we're also measuring at long-term follow-ups.
Wow. This is so inspiring. Any sense as to what is your guess as to when patients may first be able to experience these huge benefits?
We're looking at 2024, so we'll submit our NDA this year, and then FDA, we have something called breakthrough therapy with FDA, and so that means that there'll be some type of accelerated looking at this, but it still takes a while. I would expect on average, a drug being submitted as an NDA takes like a year for an approval. We're hoping that this would be in 10 months, and so that puts us out to 2024 before we'd be launching. And so we're really busy during that time between now and 2024, looking at, how do we make sure that the medical system is ready for this? How are therapists, providers ready to deliver the therapy? So there's a lot of work to do between now and then to make sure that people can receive the treatment when this is approved. There's also a whole rescheduling activity that has to happen because this is a Schedule I drug.
Can you talk a little bit more about some of what you're doing to prepare for the eventual availability of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy? I mean, you've touched on it, but can you go a little bit deeper?
Yeah. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen. So in our clinical trials, we worked with about 15 sites. And in the first study, about 70 different therapists, and then with new therapists in our second phase 3. But because nobody has the opportunity to do this, it's hard to make sure that the group is prepared, right? It's illegal to do this any other way except in a clinical study. So we're doing the best that we can with giving people the training that's needed in this modality. So we have an education program through MAPS PBC, and it's getting restarted again this year. We're kind of revamping it to support going forward into hopefully a post-approval world, and educating the therapists that would be delivering this care. So that should get restarted sometime this year. So that's a big piece of getting ready. Now there's also working with payers because we want this to be covered. It's expensive to have that much therapy, right? It's the amount of therapy that would get covered by payers, but it would be spread out over a whole year, right? And so we want reimbursement to happen in the way that this modality is delivered, so that so that people aren't unincentivized to provide this kind of a treatment. So there's a lot of work with the AMA right now to create codes that will allow providers to charge for this. The medicine, I don't think is such a big deal, right? Like being able to cover the cost of the exact drug is there are codes for that. But so I'd say education, reimbursement, so that this is widely available for people who need it the most, are two of the big things that we're focused on. Now, of course, just like any other company, you have to make sure that you have your supply chain and you know how you're going to deliver this to the therapist's office, and all of these various things, but those are pretty normal activities. An additional one that we have to do is making sure that rescheduling happens. Yeah. So with a Schedule I, it means that there's no medical use. And so once it's approved by the FDA, then there's an approved medical use. So it needs to switch from Schedule I to either 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And there's a 90-day period of time from the approval to federal rescheduling. Okay. But just to make it more interesting, there's half the states go with federal schedule. About the other half of the states do not go with the federal rescheduling. You have to do an administrative action or a legislative action in the individual state. So we're working really closely right now with those states that need to have an additional action to make sure that we're ready. Now, and there's already been a lot of, this kind of has happened somewhat with other drugs that have been approved. There is kind of a roadmap for how to work with these states, but you do need to individually work with them for your individual drug, and so that's another piece of the work we have to do.
You've got a lot going on. It's incredibly impressive. So just looking forward, even beyond next steps after MDMA for PTSD, what do you even have a chance to think about what MAPS and MAPS PBC might be focusing on? Additional indications, additional medicines, and if you can talk about that.
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that we see, because this isn't just about the symptoms, and, that we're interested in mental health in general, right? And there's a lot of other indications. So a diagnosis that somebody gets that has trauma at the root cause. Mm-hmm. So you and I might each experience the same traumatic event, but we might end up with a different diagnosis because of just our individual way that we process something. So someone might end up with PTSD. Other people might end up with an eating disorder or a substance use disorder. But at the root of these is usually trauma. And there's quite a few things out there like that. So we're looking at, what are these other indications that have trauma at that root cause, where MDMA assisted therapy could help. And so we're interested in eating disorder study. We should be starting one later this year. And we're interested in, we're also interested in expanding the way just a drug, psychedelic assisted therapy is delivered. Right now it's one-on-one. But group therapy is another thing that we're looking at so that this can become more available. We're looking at some substance use disorder. We have data from our first phase 3, and there's publications on this too, where we saw a decrease in disordered eating, a decrease in alcohol use, and decrease in depression. So these are all areas that we can investigate further. We're also interested in what does this look like to take it beyond the US. Right now, our phase 3 was focused in US, Canada, and Israel. We have a lead-in study for a phase 3 going on in the EU right now and in the UK, so geographic expansion as well. And then really important, and one that people might be surprised about, but when you start a phase 3 program with FDA, they require you to also submit a pediatric plan. Because once a drug is approved, even if it hasn't been studied in another population, it can be used in that population. And so I don't remember exactly when, but at some point in our history, FDA required that companies also look at a pediatric population. I kind of thought, FDA is going to just waive that for us, right? But they didn't. Trauma in pediatric population is very problematic, very hard to treat. So we have a pediatric plan approved by FDA that once this is approved and it goes and we have it out in the medical system and we get that more established, we would also then start to look at like a younger age group, so below 18. It's the people that have been in our studies, most of them have had childhood trauma. So some type of what we call adverse childhood experience. That's also what makes these adults really, really difficult to treat, is that because of those adverse childhood experiences, like their way their brain has even developed is different, right? There's like these strong grooves in the brain that are have been really formed, by their traumatic events. And it was great to see, like in our studies, that group responded the same. They did just as well if they had a traumatic event when they were younger, as people that had newer traumatic events. But it's important to be able to help people live a more normal life by accessing a treatment for their trauma closer in time to when it happens. So we'll be looking at that once we have approval in adults as well.
Wow. So a broad question, and then let's go. We have a number of questions that have come into the chat or the Q&A. So psychedelic research and clinical trials and other activities have been the subject of a lot of news lately. What are some of the topics in the space that you think aren't getting enough airtime or any reaction to some of the media coverage?
I feel like there's just a lot of airtime that psychedelics are getting. But these are not like, this is not a cure-all, right? This is not like, a magic, you wave a magic, pill for people and, and their trauma is cured or whatever it is that people are looking at, and that it's easy to do. I think that it's really important to understand how much work the individual that's getting the treatment has to go through and has to be willing to do. They still have to process these traumatic memories. It is not easy for them to do this. And we've had people really disappointed almost because they've come in after they've heard a lot of the media and said, oh, I thought this was going to be easy.
Yeah.
But this is people healing themselves with the support of the MDMA and the therapist in the room. It is an incredible amount of work for the person that's healing themselves.
Yep. Well, thank you. Let's go to some questions that have queued up here. Do you have any sense of the durability of the treatment? Hypothetically, how often might patients need MDMA-assisted psychotherapy to sort of get back to the healthy state that the first time got them in?
Yeah. So we do have durability from our phase 2 our phase 2 studies. We put all of the phase 2 studies together and did the long-term follow-ups and published that. And it looks really good. People maintained their decrease in their symptoms. They maintained the loss of their diagnosis. And in fact, in that group, we saw some people even improved further, because if you think about, what people have been suffering with, and these big changes that are happening just in like the 3 or 4 months that we're looking at them, those big changes lead to even more big changes. Like you start to have a better relationship with your family or with your social network or with work. And like kind of it builds on that. And so you start to integrate what you've learned into your life and have improvement. So we see good durability. That data is pretty broad. It could be from a year out to 3 years out for that group. And I can't remember the publication name, but we could put it in if there's any speaker notes after this.
Yeah, you can get that and we'll circulate that.
And now we're looking at that for our phase 3 as well. So I don't have that data to share right now, but we have been looking at the long-term follow-up from the first phase 3 of at least a year out or more. And then in the second phase 3, we're looking even, an earlier look at 6 months out and then, or more. So we'll have that durability. It is always possible that somebody's, going to be re-triggered and start to re-experience their symptoms. And we did see that some in the phase 2. And we did get permission to retreat a handful of people once their PTSD symptoms had increased. And with one more treatment, we saw that they also, again, improved. That's not how we're submitting our data to FDA for approval. It'll be a, discrete 3-time treatment that would get approved. But we will be looking post-approval as a commitment to FDA to see what happens when people relapse, or if they don't get the kind of response that they were expecting. What does another treatment look like?
Could you, for a moment, speak to what REMS means, which are particularly relevant in the case of a complex treatment like you're working on?
Yeah, so REMS are a risk evaluation mitigation strategy that are kind of on top of whatever label and regulations you have around a drug that's approved. A REMS can be put on top of that for safe use. So there's also guidelines for safe use. So REMS are usually if there's something that's like an additional large safety risk. It can also be implemented for ensuring that there's no diversion. And I think we will probably have a REMS. We're really working hard. We will be working hard. We're not doing it yet. We have ideas, but we have to negotiate with the agency once we submit for approval of what that would look like. I think if this wasn't already a Schedule I drug and it was a brand new drug that was coming out, it probably wouldn't even have a REMS, because the safety profile that we have on each of the individual phase 3s right now looks very good, very limited, reactions. But because of its known history as, a recreational drug, I think that we'll have a REMS in place related to diversion. But REMS can be a real barrier to entry for treatment providers and for the patients themselves. So we're going to work really hard to make sure what we're doing creates safe use, as well as not being a barrier to entry. A lot of the things that you would be worried about with something like this, we take care of it already without a REMS just by the way that this is delivered. So it's on-site, it's an on-site treatment with a therapist in the room. So there's no take-home medication. And so this is like psychologically safe in that as you're opening up and processing memories, you have a therapist in the room. And you're also, only getting a limited number of doses and you're getting them on site.
Got it. Thank you. Do integration sessions take place? I'm getting a couple of questions around this. Can you explain how it's done between the doses or after the 3-dose protocol? Can you give a little bit more granularity?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a good question. Integration is such an important part of this because, really this is a therapy that's assisted by a drug, right? And so you have those dosing days where you have MDMA assisted therapy. They're like 6 to 8 hours where you're in it and you're processing. People spend about maybe half of the time kind of inwardly processing, and about maybe half the time outwardly talking with the therapists in the room. Right now there's 2 therapists in the room. One of them has to be a licensed behavioral health therapist. So we feel like, so there's, you have a whole team right there to process with you. And then the next day is usually the first integration session. And that's much more talking, right? That is what you would think of as your normal kind of therapy session, where the therapists are there to help you make meaning out of what you've learned and how are you going to integrate that meaning into your life. So that happens 3 times in between each MDMA session. So MDMA assisted therapy, 3 integration visits, MDMA assisted therapy. You get the idea. You do this 3 times.
Yeah. Which is a critical component, and what you're doing is so much more complex than traditional drug development and delivery because it has this additional really important part of it.
And it is so important. It is, I think it's why we have the type of long-term, follow-up results that we have, and why people are seeing such an improvement is that they're getting the help and the support they need once they're opened up and they're able to process this traumatic memory. There's a lot to make sense of, especially when you've kind of been holding this for like 14 years.
Yeah. Or even more. I mean, that's an
Yeah.
So with all that you have going on, have you ever considered partnering with other pharma for commercialization? How do you think about what to take on versus what to potentially partner with others?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one that we get a lot. This is a first in class, and it's quite unusual in that it will be the first drug assisted therapy that's approved by the FDA, and the FDA does not regulate therapy. We feel that the quality of this and the safety of this coming out, the therapy part is incredibly important, an important part of this, right? This has to be done as a drug assisted therapy. And there just isn't a lot of other, I don't know that there's any pharmaceutical companies that would be commercializing, that would understand that piece of it. Of how to provide the education that's needed, how to set up the system, and how to support that. They're used to just launching a drug or maybe a procedure. This is a little bit closer to maybe a procedure or a device. So we did look and we did talk to various people, but it just doesn't quite fit the bill for the normal thing you would partner with. And we've run into this from the very beginning. I've been working on this for 19 years, right? And typically when you start to do clinical research, and when I worked on all my meningitis studies, you would go to clinical research sites that were really used to doing that type of research, right? They knew how to support it. They knew how to move it through. People knew how to take it into the medical system afterwards. We didn't have that because what sites we needed, we didn't find any research experience sites that also had therapists at them. So we couldn't even partner with kind of SMOs and groups that would typically be doing research. We have found, and even CROs. So CROs a lot of times will support a small pharma company when they have a drug development program, so you don't have to build it in-house. But we felt like we needed to handle this so carefully that we ended up building our own internal expertise at every step of the way, we asked this question and we were like, nope, we're the ones that are the best suited to do this. And we've asked that question about commercial and we feel we are the ones that are best suited to do this.
So you're doing it all. I mean, it's fantastic, fantastic and overwhelming, but absolutely fantastic. So MDMA is traditionally thought of as having some sort of a come down experience related to the serotonin release. And have you found, or are you working on in your trials how to best mitigate that?
Yeah, it's actually not something that we see happen really in our clinical trials. Now, you have to think about this as a quite different delivery. It's delivered at 10 o'clock in the morning on a normal circadian rhythm with people that already feel pretty awful and don't sleep, right? So a lot of times what we see is people feel that they had the first good night of sleep that they've had in a very long time, right on the night of their session. And we do see people go through, some difficult experiences but more related to processing the trauma. It's not a come down from the MDMA, but I think this is very population, it's just not, it's the way it's delivered. It's the timing of the delivery. There's nothing else. There's no alcohol. There's nothing else being used with it. And it's in this kind of normal rhythm where people get a normal night's sleep, which is really important for, how people feel mentally the next day. So we get asked that question all the time. We don't see it in this setting.
Great. Another question that I'm sure you've been asked many times is, does MDMA have specific advantages over psilocybin, over ketamine, which is currently available, and others with respect to treatment of PTSD?
Yes, I think it does. I think that there's a really important part with MDMA in that it is, some people call it an entactogen or an empathogen, right? Where it's opening. So it's not just what's happening in the brain, right? That there's this resetting, and in the HPA axis. So there's three things. There's a resetting of this HPA axis that happens like pretty immediately for people that typically have in PTSD, people have a dysregulated cortisol and HPA axis hormones. So not like you might think cortisol or something would just always be up with people with PTSD, but sometimes it's actually really low or it bounces around a lot. So you don't see a normal kind of, hormonal releases during the day. So MDMA resets this kind of very quickly. So there's that piece of it. And then there's also this change that's happening in the brain. So you're having your amygdala dampened, but then people are experiencing an increase in trust and an increase in safety. And as they're going back in to reprocess a memory, which is what's needed to help people with PTSD. But without the MDMA, when they do that, a lot of times it's re-traumatizing, re-triggering. You're just like, putting yourself back in that situation as you talk about the memory, right? So MDMA is creating a space where that happens with like kind of trust and empathy and a lot of times forgiveness also, right? So that's quite different than a traditional psychedelic that's going to be more it's just a very different experience. And you don't get that same kind of like holding a lot of times with a psilocybin or an LSD experience, which is maybe more about, which is working well, we see from results in depression. But trauma is very different from depression.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So are you doing work any work related to traumatic brain injury? And is that potentially relevant?
Yeah, I think it is. There's people with TBI that experience a lot of very similar experiences to PTSD. And a lot of times people have both the traumatic brain injury and PTSD. So we have had a little bit of that in our clinical studies. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. We had some more of it in the phase 2 studies, and we do see that people are that they do have an improvement, and we think it's a really interesting area to look at further.
Great. In today's very contentious environment, do you worry a lot, or do you worry much about this becoming a political issue?
Wow, it's a great question. We see a lot of bipartisan support, right? So all of our, and I should have said this at the beginning, even all of our phase 3 was done through philanthropy, which is also just incredibly unusual. So MAPS, that is our parent organization, is a nonprofit. They've raised all the money through philanthropy for us to do all of this clinical research. And that philanthropy has been incredibly bipartisan. And now we see, even as there's drug law reform, and as there's bills going through, and we have we have people that work in government to like really understand this and be out there talking to all the various members of Congress. And we really see that this is a bipartisan support, because PTSD happens to everybody, right? It can happen to everybody, I should say. It is a bipartisan. It's just like anything else in a lot of ways, where cancer, it's just not a political, it could be a political disease if you think about just from the vet's perspective, right? And the vets are probably a lot of the reason why we've had so much support in a bipartisan way. Because there's so much need to help them. And we have had a lot of work with the VA, and I'm sure that's helped. But I just see that, it's not political.
No,
At least
and just as
in a bipartisan way. It might be political, but it's bipartisan.
yeah, I mean, that's actually, as an observer and being involved in the space, it's striking how bipartisan, and how it's actually bringing groups that otherwise don't work very well together.
It's incredible. It's really incredible. And we've really worked to keep it that way as well.
Yeah, no, I've been watching that, and you're doing it incredibly well. Question: will the FDA approve the treatment as a whole, or just the drug? If it is the whole treatment, what does oversight tend to look like?
Yeah, the FDA does not regulate therapy. So this is like a big question, right? And I'm sure we're going to be working really closely with the agency as we get through to this. They'll be approving the drug, but the way the drug is delivered will be in the label, and in probably, something related to this in the safe use guidelines and in the REMS, that it must be delivered in the context of therapy. Right. So I think that's the way it's going to. So the drug is approved for use in a specific way, though the FDA can't regulate the psychotherapy piece of it. They can say the drug has to be administered in that setting.
Question here: what advice would you give YPO leaders who want to increase awareness about these treatments in their local chapters through events and speakers and the like?
I think having events like this is great. There's so many people that are out there now that are wonderful speakers in psychedelic assisted therapy, from many of the other companies that are also trying to work on this, but I think also from therapists themselves, patients, just really engaging. I think part of the ways things change is when people feel a personal connection to it, and that personal connection can either happen because you've experienced trauma within, your own family or social settings, or that kind of, feeling can happen because you're meeting people and talking to them and hearing firsthand about what's trying to be done. And I think the more that we make it personal for people, and we share the information openly, we read about it, we meet the people that have been treated or that are doing the treatments, like that all needs to happen. There's so much education of our medical system, of our payers, and then just of our general public that needs to happen around this. So all help is appreciated.
And I'll just add anecdotally, as chair of the psychedelic medicine for mental health group in YPO, happy to connect with any YPOers who are considering doing something like this at a chapter level, and help make it happen. We're running low on time. Let me ask another couple of questions here. Any plan to see if fewer sessions, if 2 can be as effective as 3, might also be effective? And what are other potential cost lowering measures you might take?
Yeah. Yeah. So within the phase 3 studies, we actually measured the PTSD symptoms 3 weeks after the first treatment, 3 weeks after the second treatment, and then the 8 weeks after the last treatment. So we have data. And in order to have this, help the broadest group of people. So again, our first phase 3 was severe people. Our second phase 3 was moderate to severe. We're looking for a label that would be any PTSD of any cause at any severity, because we also saw these functional improvements. We think we'll be able to do that. And I think it will be up to the patient and their provider if they want to stop at 2 treatments, right? But it's important to us to get approval for the 3 treatments because a lot of people need that 3rd treatment. But people will have the people and the provider will have the ability to, spread these out a little bit more, stop after 2 treatments. Some people feel like they only need 1 treatment, like something just happens, they have this experience, they have this knowledge that happens. We've had somebody drop out of our study after 1 treatment because they were like, that's all I needed. I'm better. But
Which is
that's
fantastic. It doesn't help your study result, but it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. We actually had incredibly low dropout rates for a phase 3 study and with a group that was getting therapy alone. But I think our therapy was also really good. So that helped keep people in the study. So I think that there's that ability to flex the number of sessions. We will have data that will get printed in the label about how people responded. But you'll be working directly between a patient and the therapist, and they'll know if they're getting better and if they need another one or not. And then group therapy is going to be a really important way to expand this. The integration visits can also be done by telemedicine, and that really helps if people don't have a provider close to their area where they don't have to travel in as many times. And I think that the therapy community is going to innovate on this. Which is maybe one of the reasons we don't want FDA to totally control the way it's delivered and control therapy, right? It's the drug plus a therapy, but there should be some room for some innovation from the community as this goes out and as they learn from it.
Great. Well, Amy, we're approaching the top of the hour here. If there is a last comment that you'd want to make sure people take home, please feel free.
Yeah, no, I think we've covered a lot of ground, Dick, and I think just, encouraging people to keep following us and keep spreading the word, and I really appreciate the support.
Well, a huge thank you for your time today and the absolutely amazing work you're doing. And I want to thank the many hundreds of people who joined and registered. You can learn more about Amy and MAPS PBC work at mapspublicbenefit.com. mapspublicbenefit.com, and we'll circulate that also. So a couple of things before concluding. I'd like to invite you, if you're a YPO member or spouse and interested in staying more informed about this whole area and learning more about the topics today, to please join the YPO Psychedelic Medicines for Mental Health group. You get forums in that, you get discussion boards, resource sharing, future global conference calls, and happy to work on chapter, regional, and international events. So please save the date for our next program with Delix Therapeutics, their CEO and their Chief Innovation Officer, who are developing what are called they're calling plastogens, looking at some of the benefit of psychedelics without necessarily the psychedelic effect. And that's coming up on April 4th, and we'll be circulating that. And a final reminder that this global conference call recording will be available and circulated shortly. So Amy, thank you so much. And to everyone, have a great day.
Thank you.